Last year, McDonald's sold more hamburgers than almost any company on the planet. And by the company's own numbers, that is not what made it most of its money. Nearly 6 times more profitable, dollar for dollar, was something else entirely, something that has almost nothing to do with food. This is a story about a decision made in 1956 by a man most customers have never heard of, that quietly turned a burger chain into one of the largest landlords on earth. Ray Kroc wasn't a restaurant man. In 1954, he was a 52-year-old salesman peddling milkshake mixing machines out of Illinois, when one order stopped him cold. A single hamburger stand in San Bernardino, California, wanted 8 of his machines at once, enough to make 40 milkshakes simultaneously. He flew out to see it for himself. What he found was a kitchen run, like a factory floor. Brothers Dick and Mac McDonald had spent years engineering something they called the Speedy Service System. A 15-cent burger, fries, and a shake, out the window in under a minute. Kroc convinced them to let him franchise it nationally. In April of 1955, Kroc franchised the first McDonald's under his own company in Des Plaines, Illinois. The deal was simple. Franchisees paid him 1.9% of their sales, 1.4% to Kroc's company, 0.5% back to the McDonald brothers, for the name and the idea. Kroc sold 18 franchises that first year. He was barely covering his own costs. 1.5% of a hamburger stand's sales was not going to finance the kind of growth he wanted, and he had no obvious way to raise the money to build faster. The person who changed that wasn't a restaurant operator. Harry Sonneborn was a finance executive at a competing chain, Tasty Freeze, and when he looked at Kroc's business, he saw the actual problem immediately. Kroc was structured like a restaurant company, collecting a thin cut of hamburger sales. The real leverage was somewhere else. The idea that came out of that conversation is still repeated inside the company today. You're not in the burger business. You're in the real estate business. In 1956, Sonneborn set up a separate company, the Franchise Realty Corporation, to do something Kroc's original deal never did: buy or lease the land and the building at each restaurant site, take out the mortgage, and then lease the whole thing to the franchisee at a markup. Accounts describe that markup starting around 20%, later rising to about 40%. Here's why that one change mattered more than the royalty ever could. Rent doesn't depend on how good a franchisee is at running a kitchen. It gets paid whether the location has a great year or a mediocre one. Kroc had traded a small, unreliable slice of hamburger sales for a fixed, predictable stream of income that sat underneath the entire business, regardless of who was flipping the burgers. A restaurant chain makes money when a customer buys a hamburger. This company had just built a second way to make money that had nothing to do with the hamburger being sold at all. In 1961, Kroc bought out the McDonald brothers' entire stake in the name and the concept for $2.7 million. 4 years later, in April of 1965, McDonald's went public at $22.50 a share and reportedly rose about 35% on its very first day of trading. What Wall Street was buying that day looked on paper like a hamburger company. What it was actually buying was a company that now owned the real estate under a rapidly growing number of hamburger stands. It didn't have to personally run. The model scaled because it solved 2 problems at once. Franchisees got a consistent, proven building and a lower upfront cost than buying land themselves. McDonald's got a fixed income stream from every single location, plus enough financial control over the real estate to hold franchisees to the same standard worldwide without having to personally manage every kitchen. That combination, a rent check that arrives regardless of the news cycle or the price of beef, attached to thousands of independently owned small businesses that all have to look and run the same way. is a large part of why McDonald's could expand as fast as it did, and why the whole system held together as it grew. It also solved a harder problem. How do you force consistency across thousands of small businesses you don't personally run? A franchise agreement alone is just a contract. But because McDonald's typically controls the lease on the land underneath a restaurant, often for a shorter term than the franchise agreement itself, it can decline to renew that lease or hand the location to someone else if a franchisee stops meeting the standard. Owning the ground isn't just how McDonald's collects rent. It's the enforcement mechanism behind the identical fries in every country this company operates in. Here's what that decision looks like in McDonald's own financial filing for 2025. Franchise restaurants brought in $16.5 billion in revenue and produced about $13.9 billion of margin, roughly an 84% margin. The restaurants McDonald's runs itself brought in more in raw sales, $9.7 billion, but produced only about $1.4 billion of margin, roughly 15%. In McDonald's own words, franchise margins represented approximately 90% of restaurant margin dollars. Almost all the profit from a minority of the sales from restaurants McDonald's isn't the one operating day to day. That's not a rounding effect. That's the entire business, working exactly the way it was designed to in 1956. As of the end of 2025, McDonald's owned about 56% of the land and about 80% of the buildings its restaurants sit on, across its major markets. There were 45 out of 356 McDonald's restaurants worldwide that year, and roughly 95% of them were franchised, not company-run. By some outside estimates, that makes McDonald's one of the largest owners of commercial real estate anywhere in the world, though the exact ranking depends on who's counting. So it's worth treating as a widely cited estimate, rather than an official title the company claims for itself. This is also why McDonald's has a reputation for weathering downturns, better than most restaurant chains. When food costs spike or a recession hits discretionary spending, the company still has that fixed rent income sitting underneath the food business, largely insulated from either problem. McDonald's own filings describe this real estate control as a reason the company can hold franchisees to consistent performance standards, among the highest in the industry, in its own words. None of that is a coincidence, and none of it is really about the food. It's a company that figured out, 7 decades ago, that owning the ground under a business is a more durable advantage than being good at running the business itself. It's easy to see McDonald's the way its own sign describes it, a place that sells hamburgers and fries. That's not false. It's just not where most of the money actually comes from. The real business was built in 1956 by a finance executive nobody puts on a coffee mug, who looked at a struggling burger stand and saw a landlord's business hiding inside it. 70 years later, the sign hasn't changed. What's underneath it did,